A police dog found a baby in the trash, then what he uncovered was heartbreaking. Officer Ryan and his canine partner, Titan, discover a newborn abandoned in a dumpster. They realize this is more than just a case of neglect. With no missing child reports and a frightened mother nowhere to be found, the mystery deepens. As Titan follows the scent, the officers uncover a dark secret, one that puts lives in danger. But can they find the truth before it's too late? Maggie shivered as she pulled her tattered coat tighter around her thin frame. The evening air had turned crisp, and the alley where she scavenged for scraps felt even colder than usual. She rummaged through a dumpster behind a closed diner, hoping to find anything edible. Her stomach had been empty since the night before, and hunger gnawed at her insides like a restless animal. As she shifted an old pizza box aside, a faint, desperate cry reached her ears. At first, she thought it was a stray cat, but something about the sound sent a chill down her spine. It wasn't the meow of a hungry kitten or the whimper of a dog. It was human. She froze, her breath hitching in her throat. Her tired eyes darted around the alley, scanning the dimly lit surroundings. A shadowy figure was moving swiftly toward the street, glancing around nervously. The person, a man, judging by his build, had his hood pulled up, concealing most of his face. Maggie watched as he slipped around the corner and disappeared into the night. Her heart pounded in her chest. Who was he? And what was that sound? The cry came again, weak but urgent. Maggie turned back toward the dumpster, the sound tugging at something deep inside her. Swallowing her fear, she took slow steps toward the source of the noise. The lid of the dumpster was slightly ajar, and an unpleasant stench filled the air. She hesitated, her hands trembling. Every instinct told her to walk away, but something about that cry wouldn't let her. She reached for the lid, but just as her fingers brushed the cold metal, doubt took hold. What if it was something terrible? What if she wasn't prepared for what she'd find? Her breathing quickened. She needed help. Spinning on her heels, she rushed out of the alley, her worn-out sneakers slapping against the pavement. Just down the block, an old payphone stood beneath a flickering streetlight. She dug in her pocket, her fingers curling around a few coins she had saved. With shaking hands, she shoved them into the slot and dialed. 911, what's your emergency? A woman's calm voice filled Maggie's ear. Maggie swallowed hard, glancing over her shoulder toward the alley. I heard something. A baby, I think. In a dumpster. Please, you have to come. Where are you, ma'am? She turned in a circle, scanning for street signs. Near 5th and Maple, behind the diner. Stay there. Officers are on their way. Maggie hung up, her fingers still gripping the receiver. Her pulse thundered in her ears as she paced back and forth, her gaze flickering toward the dark alley. Every second felt like an eternity. Then, the sound of sirens pierced the night air. Red and blue lights flashed as a patrol car screeched to a stop near the alley's entrance. The doors swung open, and 2 uniformed officers stepped out, their hands hovering near their holsters. One of them spoke in his radio while the other scanned the area. A second vehicle arrived, this one marked with the canine unit insignia. A tall officer climbed out, his expression sharp and focused. Beside him, a powerful-looking German shepherd jumped down from the back seat. Its ears pricked forward, ready for action. I called, Maggie said, her voice uneven. I heard crying in the dumpster. I think someone left a baby in there. The officer with the dog nodded. I'm Officer Ryan Carter. This is Titan. He gestured to the canine, who sniffed the air, already sensing something. Stay back. We'll handle it. Maggie nodded and wrapped her arms around herself, watching as the officers moved toward the dumpster. Titan let out a low, rumbling growl, his body tense. The officers exchanged looks before one of them stepped forward and lifted the lid. The alley fell into a heavy silence, and for a moment, Maggie held her breath, waiting for what they would find. Titan was unleashed, his strong body moving fast as he sniffed around the dumpster. His nose twitched, his ears pointed forward. Officer Ryan and his partner, Officer Julia, stood close, watching him carefully. Titan's growl became louder. Something was inside. Ryan nodded to Julia. Slowly, they opened the dumpster. A terrible smell came out, making them both step back for a second. But inside was something much worse. A bundle wrapped tightly in a blanket, small and still. Titan whined, his nose pressing against it. Julia reached in with her gloved hands, her heart pounding. She unwrapped the fabric carefully. Inside was a tiny newborn baby, his skin pale and cold. His chest barely moved. "Oh God," Julia whispered. She quickly lifted the infant into her arms, pressing him against her chest to warm him. "He's barely breathing." Ryan grabbed his radio, his voice urgent. "Dispatch. We need an ambulance at 5th and Maple. Infant found, unresponsive but alive. Send medics immediately." Julia rocked the baby gently, rubbing his back. "Come on, little one. Stay with me." The newborn made a tiny, weak sound. Julia held on to that small sign of life, praying he would survive. Maggie stepped closer, her face pale. "That man, the one I saw before I heard the crying. He was leaving the alley, looking nervous. He had a hood up. I think he's the one who left the baby." Ryan turned to her sharply. "What did he look like?" "I don't know, Maggie's voice shook. "It was dark, but he was tall, thin, and walked fast. He kept looking around like he didn't want to be seen." Ryan looked at Julia, then back at his radio. "Be advised, possible suspect last seen near 5th and Maple. Male, tall, thin, wearing a hoodie." Julia held the baby closer, whispering softly, trying to keep him awake. His tiny fingers twitched just a little. "That's good," she murmured. "You're strong. Hold on." The sound of an approaching ambulance filled the air. The red and blue lights bounced off the alley walls, flashing over Titan's dark fur. The canine sat beside Julia, his sharp eyes still scanning the alley. It was as if he knew the danger was not over yet. Maggie bit her lip. She looked at the baby, then at Titan. "He knew," she said softly. "The dog knew something was in there. He saved that baby." Ryan glanced at Titan, then down at the infant wrapped in Julia's arms. "Yeah," he said, his voice low. "He did." The ambulance doors opened, and paramedics rushed toward them. Julia carefully handed over the baby, her eyes following him as he disappeared into the ambulance. The doors shut, and the vehicle sped away, sirens wailing into the night. But Ryan wasn't watching the ambulance. He was looking at the alley's dark entrance, where the mysterious man had disappeared. His jaw tightened. "We're not done yet," he muttered. "Not until we find him." Ryan and Julia stood in the alley, the flashing lights of the patrol cars reflecting off the damp pavement. The baby was safe now, but the real work was just beginning. Whoever had abandoned the newborn was still out there. "We need to check the surveillance cameras," Ryan said. "If that guy was lurking around, there's a chance we caught him on tape." Julia nodded, already pulling out her phone to contact the station. Within minutes, they were inside a small security room at a nearby convenience store. A store employee played back the footage from the alley's camera, the grainy black and white images flickering across the screen. "There," Julia pointed at the screen as a hooded man appeared near the dumpster. The timestamp showed it had been less than an hour ago. The man moved quickly, his head low, hands stuffed in his pockets. His face was turned away from the camera. "Can you zoom in?" Ryan asked. The employee adjusted the screen, but it was no use. The hood cast a shadow over the man's features. They could see his clothes, dark jeans, a baggy hoodie, but nothing that could clearly identify him. "We need to check around," Julia said. "Someone might have seen him." Back in the alley, Maggie was still there, watching nervously as officers talked into their radios. Ryan approached her again. "Maggie, are you sure you don't remember anything else? Anything unusual about the man?" She shook her head. "I wish I did. I just remember how fast he walked, like he wanted to get away." Ryan nodded. It wasn't much, but it was something. He turned to Titan, who was sniffing the ground near the dumpster. The canine's nose twitched as he moved toward the discarded blanket that had once wrapped the baby. Titan's ears perked up, his body stiffening as he inhaled deeply. Then, without hesitation, he took off. "He's got a scent," Ryan called out, running after him. Julia followed close behind as Titan led them through the alley, past a row of closed shops, and toward an old apartment building at the corner. The dog stopped abruptly at the entrance, his nose pressed against the door. "This is it," Ryan said, his hand on his holster. "He's in there." Julia knocked loudly. "Police. Open up." Silence. Titan let out a deep growl, scratching at the door. Ryan glanced at Julia. "We're going in." Julia radioed for backup before they forced the door open. The hinges creaked as they stepped inside, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. The place was empty, the air thick with the smell of stale cigarettes and damp wood. A mattress lay on the floor, surrounded by empty food containers and a pile of old clothes. "He was just here," Julia murmured, picking up a still-warm coffee cup from a small table. Ryan ran his fingers over the edge of the door. "Look at this," he said, pointing to fresh scratches near the lock. "He left in a hurry. Probably heard us coming." Titan sniffed the room, his tail stiff, his movements alert. He led them to a small closet, where a pile of blankets was shoved against the wall. Ryan pulled them back, revealing a small duffel bag. Inside were baby clothes, a half-empty formula bottle, and a hospital bracelet. Julia picked it up, reading the tiny printed name. "The baby had a name," she said softly. "Matthew." Ryan clenched his jaw. Whoever had left the baby in that dumpster had cared enough to keep him warm, but not enough to keep him safe. "We'll find him," Ryan said, determination burning in his voice. "He won't get far." Just then, their radios crackled to life. "Suspect sighted on Oak Street, heading east on foot. Description matches the alley suspect." Ryan and Julia exchanged looks. "Let's go." Titan barked, ready. The hunt was on. At the hospital, the baby was stable. Nurses moved around him, checking his vitals, keeping him warm. But as the hours passed, something strange became clear. No one had reported a missing newborn. There were no desperate parents calling the police, no posters, no news alerts. It was as if the baby had never existed. "That's not normal," Julia said as she and Ryan sat in the hospital's waiting area. "Someone should be looking for him." Ryan agreed. "We need to dig deeper. Check birth records. If no one is reporting a missing baby, then maybe we find out where he came from." It didn't take long to get a lead. A nearby clinic had records of a woman who had given birth just days ago, but something wasn't right. The woman had disappeared shortly after leaving the clinic. No follow-up visits, no address on file. "Her name is Lisa Carter," Julia read from the report. "She gave birth 3 days ago, then vanished. No relatives listed, no known address." Ryan stared at the file. "We need to find her. If she's missing, this could be worse than we thought." Titan was their best chance. They returned to the station, retrieving the blanket that had been wrapped around the baby. Titan sniffed it, his body tensing with focus. Then, without hesitation, he started moving. They followed as he led them through the city, past streets filled with early morning traffic, toward the outskirts of town. Titan stopped in front of an old storage facility. The metal doors were rusted, the place abandoned. Ryan's gut tightened. "She's here," he muttered. Julia drew her gun as they moved inside. The air smelled of dust and something else, something metallic. "Blood." Titan whined, sniffing the floor. Then they saw it, a pile of baby clothes, stained with dark red. Nearby, the remains of a torn hospital gown. "Something bad happened here," Julia whispered. There were signs of a struggle. Scratches on the concrete floor. A broken chair. A single, small shoe left behind. "Where's Lisa?" Ryan muttered. If this was hers, where's she now? The realization settled heavily between them. Lisa Carter hadn't just disappeared. Something had taken her. Ryan's jaw tightened. "We're not looking for just an abandoned baby anymore. We're looking for a woman who might be dead." The air was heavy with unspoken fear. Titan sniffed again, turning toward a back exit. His tail stiffened. The streets were quiet except for the sound of cars in the distance. Ryan and Julia stood near their patrol car, going over the case. Maggie stood nearby, watching them. She looked nervous, like she was trying to remember something important. Then, suddenly, her eyes widened. "Wait," she said. "I saw that man before. The one in the hoodie. He was here a few days ago. But he wasn't alone. He was with a woman. She looked scared. They were arguing in the alley. I remember because she kept looking around, like she wanted to run." Ryan and Julia exchanged glances. "That could be the baby's mother," Julia said. Ryan nodded. "We need to check the cameras again. If she was here, we might have her on tape." They returned to the small security room at the convenience store. The store employee pulled up the footage from the night Maggie remembered. The screen flickered, showing grainy black and white images. The hooded man appeared again, but this time, he wasn't alone. A woman stood beside him. She looked young, her body tense, her face turned away from him. She kept glancing around, as if she wanted to escape but was too afraid. "That's her," Julia said. "She must be the baby's mother." Ryan watched closely. "We need to find her before it's too late." Just then, Ryan's radio crackled. Dispatch to Officer Carter. We received an anonymous tip. Someone reported a strange noise coming from an old motel on the edge of town. Ryan grabbed his keys. Let's move. They drove quickly, their headlights cutting through the darkness. Titan sat in the back, alert and ready. The motel was an old, rundown building with broken windows and peeling paint. The neon sign flickered weakly. Ryan parked the car, and they stepped out. The place was silent, but something felt wrong. Titan sniffed the air, his body stiff. He let out a low growl. "He smells something," Julia whispered. Ryan pulled out his flashlight and pushed open the motel door. Inside, the hallway was dark, the air thick with dust. The wooden floor creaked under their boots as they moved forward. Then they heard it, a faint whimper, a soft, broken sound. It was coming from one of the rooms. Ryan signaled to Julia. She nodded, her hand on her gun. Slowly, they moved toward the sound. Titan led the way, his nose close to the ground. The door to room 7 was slightly open. Ryan pushed it gently, and the flashlight beams swept across the small space. A woman was tied to a chair in the corner, her head slumped forward. Her face was bruised, her arms covered in red marks. She was breathing, but barely. Julia rushed forward. "She's alive." Ryan cut the ropes quickly, and the woman's body sagged forward. He caught her just in time. Her eyes fluttered open, full of fear and pain. "You're safe now," Julia whispered. "We've got you." The woman's lips trembled. "My baby," she whispered. "He's safe," Ryan said gently. "We found him. He's at the hospital." Tears rolled down her cheeks. Her body shook as she tried to speak. "He took him from me. I tried to stop him, but he was too strong. I thought I'd never see my baby again." Ryan clenched his fists. "Who did this to you? Was it the man in the hoodie?" She nodded weakly. "Yes. He said no one would ever find me. He said no one cared." Before Julia could respond, a loud noise came from the hallway. A heavy footstep, then another. Titan growled, his body tense. "He's still here," Ryan whispered. Suddenly, a gunshot rang out. The bullet hit the doorframe, splinters flying. Ryan grabbed the woman and pulled her to the floor. Julia pressed against the wall, her gun raised. The motel was silent again. Then, another creak. The man was moving. Ryan whispered into his radio. "Suspect armed. Need backup now." Titan barked, ready to chase. But Ryan held him back. It was too dangerous to send him in first. Julia peeked around the door. "I can't see him. He's hiding." Ryan took a deep breath. "We need to move carefully. He won't get away this time." The hunt wasn't over yet. Ryan held his breath, listening closely. The motel hallway was quiet again, but he knew the man was still there. Titan stood beside him, ears up, muscles tight, ready to move. The woman lay on the floor, shaking, her eyes wide with fear. Julia stayed low, gripping her gun, watching the dark hallway for any sign of movement. Then, another noise, a soft creak. Footsteps, slow and careful. Ryan tightened his grip on his weapon. The suspect was trying to escape. He glanced at Julia and gave a quick nod. They had to act fast. Titan let out a low growl. Then, without warning, he sprang forward, his powerful legs carrying him down the hall in a flash. His paws hit the floor hard as he raced toward the sound. Ryan and Julia followed quickly, staying close to the walls for cover. A door at the end of the hallway slammed shut. "He's in there," Julia whispered. Ryan reached the door and tried the handle. Locked. "Titan, find him," Ryan said, stepping back. Titan barked once, then lowered his head, sniffing around the door. His body tensed. Then, with a deep growl, he jumped up and slammed his paws against the wood. The door shook, but didn't open. Inside, something crashed to the floor. The man was moving, trying to find a way out. Ryan took a deep breath, lifted his foot, and kicked hard. The old door cracked and swung open. The room was dark, but Ryan's flashlight cut through the shadows. The man stood near the window, his hoodie still up, his face partly hidden. His hands were shaking. Then, suddenly, he pulled a knife from his pocket. "Stay back," the man shouted, his voice rough and wild. Titan growled, stepping forward, his sharp eyes locked on the suspect. Ryan held up a hand. "Put the knife down. There's nowhere to go." The man's chest rose and fell fast. His eyes darted around the room, looking for a way to escape. Then, with a loud yell, he rushed toward the door. But he didn't get far. Titan lunged. His strong body slammed into the man, knocking him off balance. The knife clattered to the ground as he hit the floor hard. Before he could move, Titan was on top of him, his sharp teeth close to the man's arm, keeping him still. Ryan moved fast, grabbing the man's hands and locking them in handcuffs. "It's over," he said firmly. Julia picked up the knife and stepped back. She let out a slow breath. "Good job, Titan." Titan stood proudly, his tail wagging slightly as he backed away from the suspect. The man groaned, turning his face to the side. His hoodie had slipped back, revealing his features for the first time. He was young, maybe in his late 20s, with dark hair and sharp, angry eyes. Ryan pulled him up to sit against the wall. "Who are you? Why did you do this?" The man glared but didn't speak. Then, a soft voice came from behind them. "His name is Daniel," the woman whispered. She was still weak, but she had managed to sit up. Her face was pale, her hands shaking as she pointed at him. "He's the baby's father." Ryan felt his stomach tighten. "You know him?" She nodded slowly. "We were together, before. I thought he loved me. But when I got pregnant, he changed. He told me he didn't want a baby. He said it would ruin his life." Tears welled in her eyes. "I tried to leave, but he wouldn't let me. He kept me locked away. Then, when the baby was born, he took him from me. He said," her voice broke. "He said he'd get rid of him." Julia's hands clenched into fists. "So he left the baby in the dumpster." The woman nodded. "He told me no one would ever find him. And if I tried to escape, he'd make sure I disappeared too." Ryan looked down at Daniel. "You were ready to kill them both, weren't you?" Daniel didn't answer, but the look in his eyes said enough. Ryan shook his head in disgust. "You've been in prison for a long time." Outside, police sirens grew louder as backup arrived. 2 officers rushed in, taking Daniel away. He didn't fight. He knew it was over. Julia helped the woman stand. "Let's get you to the hospital. Your baby is waiting for you." The woman nodded, fresh tears rolling down her cheeks. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for saving us." As they stepped outside, the cold night air wrapped around them. The sky was starting to lighten, the first hint of dawn appearing on the horizon. Titan trotted beside Ryan, his head held high, his job well done. Just a few steps away, Maggie stood near the street, watching. When Ryan met her eyes, she gave a small, teary smile. "You did something good tonight," Ryan said softly. Maggie shrugged. "I just told you what I saw. That was enough." Maggie wiped her eyes with her sleeve and looked at Titan. "He's a real hero." Ryan smiled. "Yeah, he is." As the sun began to rise, Titan sat beside Ryan, his tail wagging gently. The baby was safe. The mother was free. And the man who had hurt them would never hurt anyone again. It had been a long night, but in the end, justice had won.